One of the things that we do on this podcast is we often look at the people behind the art, right? We look at the authors who wrote the books. We look at the filmmakers who make the films. In some ways, I feel like we are almost a refutation of the idea of the death of the author. Welcome, friends, to episode 369 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And this week we discuss Maggie O'Farrell's 2020 novel, Hamnet. So, James, we're here with season 10 of the podcast. We are back. It's crazy to think that we are on our 10th season. I don't know how that is possible. But now
crazy.
is not a time for reflection, as we talked about before getting on. Now is the time for looking forward. So
yes,
I'm excited for this season. We've got a lot of great stuff coming up. We can go ahead and say we're going to be covering Frankenstein, the Del Toro Frankenstein, coming soon. We're going to be doing Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which had just started with a new HBO show. And we're going to do Project Hail Mary, so return to Andy Weir. So a lot of good stuff coming up that you all can look forward to. But today we are talking Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, which is a historical fiction literary novel, which is like a little bit more outside of what we usually do, but it's been a really refreshing read for me that I rather enjoyed. But I'm really curious to know how you felt about this book and what your thoughts are on it earlier.
So I have seen the trailer for the film that we'll be covering next week. But other than that, I didn't know much of what to expect with a story about Shakespeare, right?
Yeah.
And I found myself really engaged by it, honestly. Like I historical fiction isn't something we've done a ton of on the podcast, but this was really fun, and I didn't expect it to center Agnes, the who you know. I know some of Shakespeare history. This is something else we should talk about up front. Is like our history with Shakespeare and like how we're clearly not Shakespearean scholars,
Right.
But
We covered Macbeth
yes,
and Taming of the Shrew are our two Shakespeares we've covered so far. We've talked about, at some point we're probably going to do Romeo and Juliet. And I don't know, after this book, I'm not excited to do a Hamlet one day, maybe.
I think it'd be awesome to do Hamlet. Like I think I read Hamlet in high school. It's interesting to get this sort of reimagining, or I don't know, filling in an imaginative version of what could have been going on in his life, because we've talked about in some of our coverages about him how, you know, there's rumors that he was actually multiple people, and like whether he existed or not was disputed. And then getting into like this idea of someone who clearly has made an, unbelievable impact. One of the largest impacts maybe in art history ever, with his work, and changed the English language in so many ways, and just influenced so many things to come. And then seeing like how much it was going to center Agnes, who I thought her name was Anne Hathaway. Like I thought that was famously was like Shakespeare's wife's name, and I always thought it was funny because of the actor. Yeah,
so there's a note at the end where Maggie talks about this a little bit and says that there was like I think it was like a memoir written, or like letters written by Agnes's father, or Anne Hathaway's father, in which he refers to her as Agnes, and so she decided to go that way, even though she's referred to as Anne elsewhere. It also, I think, was like just giving characters different names, because there were some characters who like in real life share same names. But yeah, historical accuracy, it's interesting because like I think it's a point we should talk about. I think, you know, it's worth talking about, but also like it's not really the point of this book either.
Yeah.
Like I get people might want it, but like the truth is we just don't know a lot about this stuff. There's very little known about Shakespeare's wife, about his children. We don't even know how he died in real life. So this is already a bit of a leap, and it's reading between the lines. It's trying to piece together things. Now, I bet you Maggie has been reached out to by a bunch of scholars, or has probably been sent every little bit of like information about Shakespeare that comes out. You know, I don't know if they're still finding stuff or not, but it just seems like, you know, a never-ending hunt for information about his life, right?
Yeah, and at least trying to interpret the work and figure out like what the influence is, or what the inspiration could be for some of these like stories that, like I said, shaped art forever. And it's interesting because like I'm somebody who admittedly is a pretty large a fan of history. Like I like learning about history. I always find it engaging. It was one of my favorite subjects in school. And then I also really love fiction, and because I love the stories that you can create, and like the ways that you can weave these amazing fabrics of a story over the course of whether it's a movie, a book, whatever it is. But then to take the two and mash them together, it's like I find it so engaging because it's like the thing that I love about fiction, and yet it's set in all of this like historical context that you can like grab onto. And those are the things that I was responding to of like, oh, this is like really engaging. It doesn't feel like what I maybe thought it could be. And then just getting into Agnes as a character some, I just loved like this like witchy sort of like powerful, because of course like Shakespeare would seek out a partner who could match him in some way or another. And I found her to be like really magnetic on the page. And so like because the story centers her in a lot of ways, but she has this like almost supernatural sense to her at times, and like there's so much that goes into that I found to be like, wow, I really wasn't expecting that for the story. And then just the pure emotion of like this idea that like Shakespeare could have eventually created Hamlet in response to losing a child, and like how, I mean, of course the Hamlet sort of she starts the story by talking about how those two things are they were kind of interchangeable.
I want to read. There's actually a very interesting little tidbit at the very start of the book, where she says two things which I think are very important. One is like historical notes, and she says, in the 1580s, a couple living on Henley Street, Stratford, had 3 children: Susanna, then Hamnet, and Judith, who were twins. The boy Hamnet died in 1596, aged 11. 4 years or so later, the father wrote a play called Hamlet. And like, I love these because this is very kind of cold. It almost presents them as if they're disconnected from one another, but by putting them all in a row implies connection. And it applies like what we're going to explore with this book is like how these events are connected. Because I think I've heard her talk about how when she learned these facts, she always felt like there has to be connection here. There has to be more going on. And I love that she ended up writing this whole book just to kind of explore this sort of idle thought she had. And then, what you were talking about follows that, and it says, Hamnet and Hamlet are in fact the same name, entirely interchangeable in Stratford records in the late 16th and early 17th century. This was by Stephen Greenblatt, who wrote about this in 2004. So this was not about this book. So this is just like established thing that I didn't know, that Hamnet and Hamlet are essentially the same name. So that was fascinating to me, that because like I think if I had known that Shakespeare's son, his name was Hamlet, I would have been like, okay, that's clearly something. But like it being Hamnet versus Hamlet, I didn't know those were considered the same name. So I think that does lead even more credence to the idea that these two things were intimately linked.
Well, I would admit too that I before this project, I had no idea he had a son named Hamnet, and even just that being somewhat similar would have. I
mean, I mentioned it I went and listened to our bio in Macbeth, and I very briefly mentioned that he had a son named Hamnet who died at age 11, and I was like, that was really tragic, I'm sure. But I was like, not much is known about it, and then we kind of moved on, but like because that's kind of what was known about it. So I love that this operates in the place of that mystery.
Was our Macbeth coverage before this book was out?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah,
might have been around the same time. Because I think it was post-pandemic.
Okay,
I want to say when that Coen brother or which.
Ethan
Cohen's film came out. Whenever that was, it was that year.
Or Joel Coen. I think it may have been Joel Coen actually.
One of the Coen brothers. I think shows how much we remember about former projects. Anyway,
that's an excellent film too. That's unfortunate. I should know that.
Excellent film, and I loved our coverage of it. But the bio details had gotten slippery, and I went back and listened to it. Anne Hathaway is what I said her name was. Very interesting. I want to. So, I feel like I've touched on this a few times on the podcast, but I don't know if I've ever like really synthesized my thoughts on it. But I feel like, and this might annoy some book people, so forgive me, I'm kind of talking to film people. I feel like the prose of a writer is in many ways akin to the cinematography of a film.
Sure.
And I think, and I'll try and defend that in some ways. I think that it is in some ways an invisible art form that you have to look for to notice. But once you do, it's incredibly rewarding. But your average film goer might just kind of pass them by, or maybe it affects them subconsciously, but they don't realize it, right?
Yeah. Well, when done at the best of both abilities, I think at the top of the writing community, at the top of the cinematography community, you don't notice their touch, and it is very subtle.
Unless you're looking for it. And then, there also can be like very stylized, or can be very kind of invisible, right? There's different ways to go about it. But I think also it kind of provides the texture of the story. Some great films are great largely because of how excellent the cinematography is, and how you can linger on, shots and sort of like appreciate the artistry of what is in the frame and the beauty of it. And some books are great for the same reason, but it is the artistry on the page, the beauty of the prose. And I think this book rises to that level for me. And that was one of the things I immediately was falling in love with, is I think she's an excellent writer. And as soon as we open this book up, because we got those facts, we get into this deep perspective. Although it's like semi-omniscient in the same way that we've seen a few different writers do over the years, where at times we get kind of a pulled out omniscient look at the world. And then at other times we kind of lean in and get close to a third person character. But we get so close to Hamnet in this opening that I immediately felt almost like chills. Like we're about to get such an immersive experience that I was immediately transfixed. And like I will read up to a point where I think it does build a mystery, and it does hook you in a certain way. More than just plot-wise, and more than just character-wise, I think the language being deployed itself hooks you. If you're someone like me who pays attention to this sort of thing and can be sort of wowed by it. But I will also grant that as I was looking through some of the reviews, I saw some people saying that the book felt flat to them, or they didn't feel like it had, or it didn't move. It was like too slow paced, like things like that. You see. And I always think, and I can't speak for every reviewer, but like I always think that people like that are maybe like more interested in plot, more interested in things moving, things happening, and less in the slower moments where they are being asked to contemplate word choice, being asked to contemplate some sort of thematic thing or character thing, or like this in this book we have intertwining timelines that are presented back to back. And I thought there was a lot of brilliance in that interplay. And like, why did we pair this scene with this scene? Why did we pair this scene with this scene? And it's those little subtle details and choices that I found really engaging, that I think some people are maybe just less enthralled by and are like, okay, let's get to the point, And I just don't agree with that. I thought this book was brilliant. But yeah, I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is, like, here before we get to spoilers, if you think you could be in the mood for a book like this, that is going to be this close reading of a character, that's going to touch on grief, love, it's going to transport you to another time. I've been playing a lot of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which is a game that's set in like 14th century Bohemia, I think, but kind of a similar area. And I was amazed at how similar certain things felt to this book, because I was realizing, these only occurred, maybe like 200 years apart. But in that time frame, that was like less technological innovation happening those periods, so kind of similar. And I love that. I love being transported somewhere to a place. And I just thought that was really engaging. So
it's funny because like I've heard you talk about Kingdom Come, and I've seen some gameplay and stuff, and I actually thought of the same thing. I thought of Kingdom Come because I'm like, that's like the simulator to what it's like to live in this era. And like, really for example, some of the things that you're talking about, I absolutely agree with. Like the way that like a slow burn story can take you methodically, show you a world, build it, give it such texture and richness, and like I think of like we're learning more about Agnes and like some of her what makes her up. So she's like hanging out with bees, and the way that like the bees and the description of like nature, the sky, the forest, like all that, the interplay of all of that, and like how that's so her. And then how, as we learn more about the poet, which I think is a really brilliant and fun, the father,
he's never
the
named,
poet,
by the way,
the husband,
he's the tutor, the poet, the husband. A lot of characters, there's not a lot of names. We get some, but often characters are referred to by their roles that they might play. But in particular, I'm almost certain he is never actually fully named. The word Shakespeare does not appear in this book.
I don't think it does.
And I don't think William does either.
Yeah, and so I was just realizing, like, so in tying her to that, and the way that it was described through the prose was what was very engaging to me, and it made me feel like, oh, I respond to this, and I feel like the magic of the world when I'm in nature and I start thinking about the way that these things all interplay together, and that's so that makes up that character, and then the poet with the sort of talk of the city and the pull into that world and some of that. I just think, like, in crafting a world like that feels rich, believable, and then also, like, takes you on an emotion, like, it's evoking emotions without telling you how to feel. It's like, there's with the bees where she's talking about, like, Agnes is like, if only she would have realized, like, she would have left the bees earlier had she realized it. Basically, like, there's talking about, like, whether it could change of, like, something.
Future Agnes thinking back that we get tidbits of and reflecting on it, and it also foreshadows something tragic occurring.
For sure.
Yeah. So,
and, like,
really clever ways to add it adds a little spice to it, adds a little interest to us as we go, ooh, why? You know what I mean? Like, it makes us ask the question.
And what power would there be in leaving earlier? I guess more time with Hamnet.
Yeah, what
possibly?
would have been different?
Yeah.
It's an open question. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the kind of stuff that I love seeing. And then, as you said, the jumping between, I thought that was really smart to jump to, like, the beginning, because this is like a romance story as well. We're getting, like, the beginning of their journey together, and then we're getting, like, the realistic depiction of, like, the era one, because of, like, plagues, just, like, I mean, the way that, like, the family,
the friction between these two families, that's very Romeo and Juliet in some ways. You could see, like, hints at stories that maybe she was drawing from and kind of extrapolating out from details that are known about his life, saying, like, maybe these were some things that he was dealing with. Yeah,
definitely. And but again, just in the historical context too of, like, they're, like, negotiating who's going to marry who, and they're going to give, like, what do you call that, a dowry or whatever. Yeah. Like, just like how the world, there's so many things that you can latch onto and identify with in our modern world, and at the same time you can see as, like, archaic and, like, historical and alien to us at this point.
And it's the emotion, like, it's the connection to love, to grief, to loss, to worrying about your loved ones. All of these things are, many people, like, I've heard this talked about, like, even you go all the way back to ancient times, like, it seems that people always lived these rich inner lives. They have always loved their partners, loved their children, worried about them. There's all these things that are universal throughout human history, and we can go back to all these other time periods, and those are the things, I think, that connect us
with the idea of that emotion and the things that carry through. I think what makes this story very interesting is that Shakespeare, I think, is often put on this pedestal of being, like, a mythological figure, and then thinking of him in the same, like, grounded sort of human way that we all operate and see the world. I think that's, like, some of the magic of this story.
I agree, man. So one of the things that we do on this podcast is we often look at the people behind the art, right? We look at the authors who wrote the books. We look at the filmmakers who make the films. In some ways, I feel like we are almost a refutation of the idea of the death of the author, even though, like, I think that there is merit to that, and people don't know. That's sort of a critical analysis approach, or a theory of criticism where you divorce the author from the work, and you critique the work sort of in a vacuum. As a reader might encounter it on a shelf, and you say, knowing nothing about the author and their intentions don't matter. It's all about what's on the page, right? And, like, there's some value in that sort of analysis, but I think this book is a great example of what is maybe lost and what can be added to a conversation about art if you do take into account the meanings behind things, the people behind creating them. And I think that has become especially important in this day and age, where in some ways the rise of AI and AI art is the ultimate manifestation of the idea of the death of the author, because truly the idea that the author doesn't matter becomes central to the idea of AI art, right? And this is sort of the response to that of, it does matter. Intention matters. It's part of what makes it magical, part of what makes it memorable and connect with all of us is the intention. even if we don't know it, even if you aren't aware of it, doesn't mean that it's not there and that it's not having an effect on you. And I think that's something that is maybe a little bit bigger than what I'm about to get into here, but I just wanted to touch on that a little bit because you're right. That made me think of that point, and that, yeah, I don't know. I feel like this really sort of emphasizes the value of the personal touch, the human touch.
And in Maggie O'Farrell's imagination, like just seeing what you can, if you choose to, and if you want to take, I would say, some leaps here and there, but what you can extrapolate out of someone's art. And with someone, again, this person hasn't been around for hundreds of years. Obviously their work is highly studied and it's incredibly important, but this is someone who saw all of that and said, this was a human being that existed at one point.
Yeah.
I have like an idea of what it's like to love somebody. And it's like this idea of losing a child.
We're going to get into her bio here pretty soon, and I can tell you some ways in which her bio connects with the things that happen in here.
Yeah.
Because she is also very present in this book.
That's cool, yeah. Because that was my point, is just like you can choose to dig into something as far as you want to and derive meaning. And whether that's true to fact or not, it can still be powerful and emotional and affect us, which I think this book does really, really well.
All right, enough preamble. Let me read. A boy is coming down a flight of stairs. The passage is narrow and twists back on itself. He takes each step slowly, sliding himself along the wall, his boots meeting each tread with a thud. Near the bottom, he pauses for a moment, looking back at the way he has come. Then, suddenly resolute, he leaps the final 3 stairs, as is his habit. He stumbles as he lands, falling to his knees on the flagstone floor. It is a close, windless day in late summer, and the downstairs room is slashed by long strips of light. The sun glowers at him from outside, the windows lattice slabs of yellow set into the plaster. He gets up, rubbing his legs. He looks one way up the stairs, he looks the other, unable to decide which way he should turn. The room is empty, the fire ruminating in its grate, orange embers below soft, spiraling smoke. His injured kneecaps throb in time with his heartbeat. He stands with one hand resting on the latch of the door of the stairs, the scuffed leather tip of his boot raised, poised for motion, for flight. His hair, light-colored, almost gold, rises up from his brow in tufts. There is no one here. All right, so that's the opening to the book. And you're like, this is interesting, right? It's a very quiet moment. It's a kid coming down the stairs. He leaps down the final 3. He hurts his leg a little bit. He doesn't know where to go. He's just kind of looking around, figuring out what's going on. It's a quiet day. It's a soft scene. We got sunlight coming in through the windows, right? And he notices that there's no one there. And so there's a hint of the ominous, I think, in that. This is a child who is sort of left to his own devices, and we start to worry. And like we've opened the book with this factoid about Hamnet dying.
Right.
So you set up a little bit of that tension, maybe. Like, we don't think he's probably going to die right here, but we're like something bad must happen this day. And then as we continue to read this timeline, indeed, that is what we're learning about. We're learning about a very important turning point in his life, and the moment that he does end up contracting an illness. So, without getting too spoilery, I guess like it is that, but like it takes a little while for that to play out. And instead, there's some other things that happen before that.
I have a few interpretations too of like that as an opening scene, right? Like, so we know from that opening section that Hamnet will die, and this idea of like no one being around and it being sort of this like normal, seemingly warm day that just like feels just like any other day in a sense. And like this could be what the future looks like. This could be a quote unquote heaven, if you believe in that sort of thing. Like this could be like like not that's what's happening in the scene, but this is like almost some line to evoke what Hamnet may or may not be experiencing in his future. And then also on top of that, just calling attention to how the ordinary is so taken for granted in a lot of ways. Like this is like, we know that Hamnet will die young. And so like every moment feels precious. Every single, unsuspecting thing that you're doing feels like it has a lot of weight to it when you know that the time clock for this child is going to be short. And so like, I don't know, it's a really powerful way to open a story like that.
Powerful. I think also there's a couple of details that really stood out to me as we got in here, because in some ways they're almost, I'm always fascinated by the ways in which authors sort of break commonly accepted rules or like guidelines that exist in writing. So one of the things that she does here is she says the fire is ruminating in its grate, which I think is a really interesting phrase here, because rumination is sort of a thinking act. It is a person-led act. It is something that you do in your own mind, right? So we are personifying the fire. We also get a sun that glowers, personifying the sun. So we've done it twice now, back to back, fairly closely. There may be others in here too, and one of the things that does is it starts to introduce a theme that I think we will get explored through Agnes especially, and that is the idea of there being sort of a secret truth to the universe, or secret magic, a secret perspective or opinion, or maybe you'd call it God, but like I think it's unnamed. I think it's just like a force or a fate. There's something there that goes beyond the mundane world, and I think those details hint at it without being explicit. And I think that continues to grow as you continue to read this chapter. There's these ideas that there is something bigger than just the reality that we're seeing. And I think that immediately sets up Agnes's powers, if you want to look at them that way. She has an ability to read signs. She has the ability to foresee the future. She can know things about people she shouldn't know. She perhaps is a little bit psychic. Like you said, witchy. She seems tied into knowledge of the earth and the power of that earth. And then there's like a moment later in the book where she's talking and she says there are different kinds of intelligence. She's talking about someone who can't read but is still intelligent. And I think that is in many ways talking about herself as well. And I think she is being presented as the alternative to the towering mind that we all historically look back at William Shakespeare as and say, oh my God, I can't believe this guy thought up all these stories, and like what an astounding mind he must
almost
have had.
Supernatural in his own right. Like almost like a mythical, magical sort of mind.
And so she's setting up Agnes as a pairing for this that could feel his equal and in some ways rival it. And it's because she is being set up to be that talented with a knowledge of the natural world and attention to maybe the sublime, something beyond our world.
Especially for that era too. Like this is the era of like, I mean, this is probably a little later, but like witches were being burned.
Oh,
and stuff,
for sure.
And, like, this is, you know what I mean?
No,
like,
I mean, I think that was still happening.
Well, I'm
witchcraft was definitely not something that I think was still very scary, you know?
They say that like the poet or the father or the husband's dad, his name's John, recently had been like fined for not going to church, and I was like, oh damn, like this is that kind of like
and it's interesting how like this feels very pagan to me.
It does.
And there is a way in which she connects it to the church. There's a priest character later that Agnes has like a good relationship with, who seems to be a Christian priest.
Her parents are like, at one point she like talks to them about it, or they realize, and they're like, no, that's not Christian, hide that, like don't tell anybody about that.
Well, so, Agnes's mother in particular was basically a witch woman from what we've heard.
It seems that way,
there's a whole thing we'll get into with her, but yeah, I thought that's all set up here in subtly, but in a really interesting way. And like that's a very quiet, simple scene, and yet I was immediately hooked. So it just goes to show that nothing like flashy is happening there, you know. But I thought it was incredibly effective, and it gives you a taste of what the prose is like, which I think is consistently a very high level here.
Yeah, I think it's also a really smart premise too, with like something as ubiquitous as like Shakespeare, right? Like having so that's the framing device, and now we're gonna like explore some of these spaces that nobody really has before.
And she knows that it's such a almost suffocating, overwhelming premise. I love that she keeps it at arm's length in the way that she does, right? And that she doesn't call him Shakespeare. She doesn't really engage with that part of it much at all. It's really like, let's focus on Hamnet. Let's focus on Agnes. And yes, he's a character. And yes, we're going to talk about him because he's important. But like, he's not given more weight than the other characters, right? And if anything, he's just a third of the main characters of this book, which are probably Hamnet, Agnes, and Shakespeare all sort of equally.
Yeah. Well, and I also love that like there's a good half of this book where Shakespeare isn't Shakespeare yet. He's becoming Shakespeare, and these other characters.
This is about a period of his life when he was young and it wasn't anything yet. He was just wanting to become a playwright and stuff. Yeah.
And you could see a version of this character that spins his wheels and doesn't do anything with his life, that becomes all this epic,
Well, and you could argue
lore.
that Agnes serves a key role in what would become the Shakespeare that we all know. It's just a role that is unsung and unappreciated. Now, again, this might not all be true, but it's what Maggie is playing with, and I just think it's a really smart way to do it.
Yeah, it's true to the story, is emotionally and all the resonance that it's setting up for sure. Yeah.
All right, man. So we need to get into spoilers here because we got a lot of spoiler talk to do. I do want to say real quick before we do that, this season we are going to be focusing a little more on our Discord. And in particular, we're going to collect suggestions for future projects on Discord. I'm going to have an area on there where you can go on and suggest. So if you want to suggest stuff to us and have it count towards the suggestions, you're going to want to be on our Discord. I will include a link in the show notes to this. We're going to start making the link on our website, so you'll be able to find it. Join up that way. You can also just reach out to us if you want it, and we'll send it to you. We'd love to have more people on our Discord. And then it'll still be a patron thing eventually. We'll have like a final poll that patrons will vote on. But Discord's going to be where you want to be to suggest projects in the first place. So
yeah, and this is for us to basically create a list that will then become a short list that the patrons vote on. So if you want to be involved in that process, definitely, it doesn't cost you anything. Come hang out with us in Discord.
All right, man. So let's actually touch a little bit on Maggie's bio. Then we'll jump into spoilers.
Yeah.
I don't want to jump over that. I think it's important. So Maggie O'Farrell is a novelist born in Northern Ireland in 1972 who would grow up in Wales and Scotland. She has published 9 novels to date, with a 10th scheduled to be released this summer, as well as an autobiography and a pair of children's books. Her writing has earned her numerous awards, including the Betty Trask Award, which I think is an award for a first-time novelist from the UK, as well as the Costa Novel Award. And then when Hamnet came out, she would earn the Women's Prize for Fiction. It would earn her a place in the top of the Sunday Times bestseller list, and it was named as Waterstone's Book of the Year. So this novel in particular got her a lot of acclaim as well. As far as her personal life, her father was an academic. I think he taught economics specifically, who at a very young age, he would take a job lecturing at the University of Wales. So that was when she moved out of Northern Ireland. At 8 years old, Maggie would become hospitalized with encephalitis, which is a swelling in the brain condition. And it would see her missing a year of school. The doctors told her that she would never walk again.
Jeez.
And at first, she was unable to hold a pen or a book. But after 2 years of rehabilitation, she began to walk again. This is all in her autobiography, so this is like public information.
Wow.
She connects this part to her developing a love of literature early on, because this time away from school where she couldn't walk, she developed a love for literature. So she looks back at this as a powerful moment. And honestly, like reading that, I was just thinking about how I was in a wheelchair for a year, and just like I am intimately aware. I mean, I was older when it happened to me, but like I'm just very aware of how limiting it is and how much it changes your life. So especially going through it at 8 years old, must have been a very traumatic and monumental period in her life.
Wow, yeah.
She would go on to study at New Hall, which is now called Murray Edwards College, which is a women's-only constituent college of the University of Cambridge. She would go on to marry fellow writer William Sutcliffe, who she met while they were both students at Cambridge, and as of 2017, they live in Edinburgh, Scotland, with their 3 children. I did see somewhere that she was able to sort of harness her fear of losing her own child, who had contracted meningitis at the age of 4 when writing this book. So
that's wild.
There was like this. Yeah, I think this is all in her autobiography.
Yeah.
So she was tying heavily on not only her own experience as a child dealing with sickness, but also having a child herself and how afraid she was of losing that child. That reminds me a little bit of like Stephen King.
Pet Sematary.
And his fear around losing his children or his child when he wrote Pet Sematary. Yeah. And it's a fascinating way. It's like she didn't lose her child, but like the fear of it and the thought of it, you can still touch on, you can still draw from for your own fiction. Right. So I think that's interesting to note here.
Man, they have been through it. Her family's been through it. It sounds like.
Sounds like it. But yeah, I mean, she's a prolific author. I mean, she's been publishing only for about, I guess, 15 years or so, and has already got a 10th book coming out, or 10th novel coming out, 2 children's books, an autobiography. Very prolific.
And an adaptation.
Which, by the way, this also already has been adapted. I mean, obviously, it's getting the film adaptation we'll talk about next week, but was adapted for the stage in 2023. Cool. And in fact, the Hamnet play, I believe, debuted in Stratford upon
Avon.
Stratford upon Avon.
Wow.
Which is obviously prominently features in this book and in William Shakespeare's life. So I thought it was really cool that that's where it appeared, and then it would go on to have like a run. And I think there's got to be a tie between that step and now getting the film, right? Like you see it work on the stage is probably a big part of it.
You would think, yeah.
You would think.
Yeah, I mean, with all that background, I guess I could see how this is a very personal story for her to write, and then to connect it in those ways. Like I was already kind of picking up on this idea of like, I think everyone has people they don't want to lose, and that being a kind of entryway into this story for her. But to have all of those experiences, I think those specific details she can probably, from her own experience and then having seen it from the perspective of a parent, like you can I'm sure that those scenes are more impactful due to that. That's the kind of stuff that you can't, I don't know, I think you can use your imagination to get to, but once you've been through it, there's some really genuinely heart-wrenching things that happen in this story, specifically the death of Hamnet, which we're going to get to in a second. But like that just being, the titular character, clearly that's like kind of the whole engine of the story is like seeing where that goes. And that I think is effectively sad, especially because of, we'll get into it, but maybe there's some powers that have been passed on to Agnes's children as well.
Yeah, it does seem like that could be the case. All right, well, let's get into the characters. So I'm going to read a little bit of summary here. So Hamnet is a historical novel set in late 16th century England that traces the intertwined lives of a family before and after the death of an 11-year-old boy. Told through the omniscient narrator and a rotating third-person perspective, the novel moves between 2 timelines, one beginning with the courtship and marriage of a young Latin tutor and Agnes, and the other opening years later with the sudden illness of their daughter Judith. The epigraph establishes Hamnet's death before the story unfolds, and the narrative is divided into 2 parts that braid past and present. Agnes, a woman with a witchy reputation for her independence and intuition, falls in love with the tutor despite opposition from their families. A premarital pregnancy forces their marriage, and Agnes moves into her in-laws' home on Henley in Stratford, where she establishes herself as a capable housekeeper and an apothecary. She gives birth to her first child, Susanna, alone in the woods, and later to twins, Hamnet and Judith. After Susanna's birth, the father grows melancholic and distant, prompting Agnes to encourage him to seek opportunity in London, where he finds renewal in writing and the theater, while Agnes remains in Stratford with the children. I think let's stop here and talk a little bit about characters. We do have a lot of side characters as well, and various roles here, all interesting. One I want to talk about is this motherfucker, the most villainous character in the entire book, John. This is Shakespeare's father. This is Hamnet's grandfather, who is such a cantankerous old bastard that is abusive and terrible. And the way she brings this character to life and the threat of him and just how vile a person he is, how he wants to take advantage of people, and he just has like hatred just like in him that just comes out sometimes. I don't know. I hated this guy so much.
He makes his problems other people's problems.
Yeah.
He makes bad deals. He fucks up and he's selling wool when he's not supposed to or something.
Yeah, and then he's judging everybody else, even though he's like the worst of all of them. And
he's trying to get back in everybody's good graces, so he's kind of like cowardly or like desperate in that way. And he's just kind of a despicable character.
So despicable.
Yeah. Not to mention like he very physically violent to like everyone around him.
Well, and specifically to Hamnet, who
and Shakespeare
and Shakespeare.
William.
Yeah. So Shakespeare, he like grows up with this, and he suffers a lot of physical abuse, and he gets to a point where he has grown up, and he kind of tells him like, that's the last time you'll ever hit me. he stands up to him, but like he starts to sense that there's danger here. And we hear about it from Hamnet's point of view, where he's like, my dad always told me not to, be alone with him, like to be careful around him, like certain things. And like, it's just crazy that this is something he has to say. And like, and then we see it play out, right? We see it play out. He hits him in the head with like a cup, like smashes it into his head. He's this little boy. And, it's such a, I don't know, emotionally sort of like a haymaker of a scene, because we know what's coming to this kid, and then like to have this be a moment that happens. And I love the way she sets it up too, because the implication is that Agnes knows that this happens and regrets not being able to stop it. But what's fascinating, and I'm wondering if this will stay true in the movie or not, is like we don't actually get a scene. It was the one thing I wanted, but like maybe it was withheld from me for a reason. I'd be curious if I could ask Maggie that. I'd be curious to know if that was a deliberate choice to withhold any sort of confrontation where the abuse that John does to Hamnet comes out and we see like a reckoning over it. Because I don't remember that ever being sussed out. I don't remember anyone ever confronting John over it. He just kind of gets away with it and gets to be his shitty self, and no one seems to ever really know about it.
Well, we get to read between the lines and think, like, I wonder if he regrets that kind of stuff when Hamnet's dead, Like, when Hamnet's gone, is John the kind of person that holds any regret?
I kept thinking, like, maybe she was gonna redeem him. I was like, is John gonna be redeemed in some way? But then he just kept being terrible. So I don't know.
No, I think it's a sign of the times, too. Like, I think at that point, there's some people who just operated this way. And I'm sure there still are. There's no question that, like, the evil still exists. But
yeah,
it's like it was more normalized. Like, beating your kid wasn't something that,
was, like,
I mean,
that's what everybody did.
And everything. Yeah. So
yeah.
I think that maybe this person didn't have any regret and just continued to be a piece of shit. But I do want to note, too, that the poet, the husband, the father, he kind of breaks the cycle of violence as far as we can tell. He never, seemingly hurts his kids in any way.
And, he, I think brilliantly is shown to be struggling with this life that has been handed to him. The idea that he's going to follow in his father's footsteps when his father has been this villain to him. I think it really brilliantly sets up the psychology that maybe was at play here, but maybe wasn't, It's all kind of a guess, but It's so plausible, that he would not want to follow in his father's footsteps and want to go do his own thing. And you combine that with a character who's got his head in the clouds. He's always thinking up stories. He just wants something more. And I kind of love the way that she had this moment where it was after the birth of his first child. Something's wrong, right? And it's like she doesn't know she's like, what's wrong? Why are you so upset? Why are you so sort of sad all the time? He's like going to bed early and just like, she's like, are you sick? And he's like, no. And like, I thought this was such a cool way of showing depression in an era where no one would have like necessarily a word for that, or they wouldn't call it that. But I think that's clearly what's going on. This dude he's depressed. He wants to go somewhere else, do something else with his life. He's feeling trapped, and he's feeling like he's not able to actualize in the way that he wants to.
Yeah, definitely. And how someone like Shakespeare having doubt and having this kind of scenario along the path is, to be I think it's in showing that like most people, especially artists, can experience a lot of this, and that's sort of like ambition.
It's kind of a burden on his family too, right? Like it pulls him away from Agnes. He can't be the romantic lead that we would want for her, because he has his own path that's going to take him to London. It's going to take him away from home, and it's tragic, right? It's tragic that he's not there.
Well, especially because there was a plan in place that they were all going to go to London at some point, and things just didn't work out.
The health of one of his kids was too sickly to move to London was the implication. Yeah, and
life just sort of gets in the way sometimes, and how all that it's just not clean and neat. Like you never know what's going to happen. So, in just wrapping up with John, I also note that like the poet, the husband, the father, he he kind of is ashamed by John. Like he
for
like
sure.
knows like local, like in the area, he doesn't want to kind of be seen as like John's son and like he's a fuck up and you're a part of his family, and like there's a power dynamic there that like he's still having to contend with. And so eventually when he does go away, as you were talking about, like he has this ambition, the way that they kind of get him there is this idea of like, oh, selling the gloves from his father in London and then working, and then that sort of just naturally leading to like a organic path for him into the theater.
Yeah. No, it's so cleverly done too, because he's able to distance himself from that baggage that he has, all the people who know his father, and he just has to remove himself from that situation, even as it seems like he's found the love of his life. Like, why would you want to leave this? You're in this like sort of fairy tale romance, this fairy tale moment. Everything's set up for you, except he's still living under the shadow of his father, and the weight that he was probably dealing with having all this stuff going on, all these stories that he needed to tell. I think it's also really brilliant here early on how she intertwines these different plot lines that are occurring in different time periods. So on one hand, we have this first day with Hamnet and the events that are going to lead him up to discovering that his sister has fallen ill, which is a surprise for us, right? Because we know that Hamnet is the one who's supposed to be sick here or probably going to die. And so we're like, wait, what? She's the one who's ill. Judith seems to have the bubonic plague. It's his discovery of that. At the same time, we're dealing with the early romance between the Latin tutor and Agnes, leading up to where these two moments coincide. I believe it's their wedding and the moment that she is getting home and Hamnet says, "Where were you?" And he's angry with her, right? And like, it's like the moment where she like has the most regret. This is the thing that she thinks about on her deathbed. It's the thing that she regrets most in her life, not being there. And it's like these bookends moments, right? Of like the beginning and ending of something special. And, just two very monumental moments, and to put them narratively next to each other, even though they occur sequentially quite far apart, I think was a really smart choice. And whenever that happens, it's being done for a deliberate reason, and I think it's for that reason. The way the two kind of inform each other is quite interesting.
And I feel like I'm kind of waiting for when we get into the plot, but I want to talk a lot more about Agnes too as a character, because it is so centered on her. Like again, her introduction as a character and being so different than everyone else. That's so cool.
She's a witch.
she's witchy and she has a hawk.
She's
yeah,
straight up character out of like a dark fantasy novel or something. In some ways, I love it.
She also is just like so she has so much autonomy in this
she could talk to
era
bees.
where
maybe
yeah in an era when I think like suppression of women's voices, I'm sure was at an all-time high.
Absolutely.
Or at least
Society was not ready for her. She's not fulfilling the role that they want her to fill. And then she's sort of pagan. She's sort of witchy. She's tied to the earth in a way that Christianity had moved away from in a lot of sense. It was very like of the heavens, not of the earth anymore. And
there's a lot of like herbal like remedies and things that she's aware of, which I thought was really cool.
old like sort of magic and mysticism tied to the herbs and knowledge of nature, which like it's funny because like some of that does have some science to it too. As you start dealing with mixing herbs and stuff, you're kind of making medicines for people and like early forms of medicines that some of that stuff we still use to this day. So it's fascinating. Early
on, characters are telling the poet, the father, the husband, the Latin teacher,
telling
him that they kind of were hinting at like, you shouldn't be with her. She's weird. She's strange. Like
but also she has this tie. She has this like dowry, and like whoever gets with her is going to like
the farm,
be positioned well with the farm and the sort of holdings of the family. So yeah, there's multiple reasons they don't want this union to happen.
But that's why John, the old bastard that he is, was like very interested in them getting together. He's like, yeah, right away. Like I think she reveals that she's pregnant actually very quickly. She's pregnant and then goes to the family, and John's like, sick. Let's set this up and let's make
his
sure
mom's all upset, and John's like, no, this is great.
Yeah,
because he can turn it to his own ends. And I wish we had gotten a scene of like John being miserable, and like I hope that he didn't get any of the money that the Latin tutor would go on to make. I don't know. I wanted a little more of that just to make me feel a little bit of catharsis there.
The other thing I want to explore is like the young Agnes stuff too, where we hear about her. So it seems that her mother like died in childbirth.
Yeah, her father always kind of loved that memory of her. And then her stepmother is actually quite villainous in some ways too. She's not as bad as John. Like, she has more redeeming qualities, I think. But in some ways, she always resents Agnes and will always resent Agnes because of who her mother was. Like, she is the daughter of another woman, and it seems like her husband will always love this other woman and will never love me the same.
Agnes like holds on to the memories of her mother, and some things that couldn't have happened, right? Age-wise, I think that like that she has memories of like...
She keeps having dreams of her mother. And then, she has a brother, Bartholomew, which, by the way, love that guy. Great character. Yeah. I mean, he doesn't do a whole lot, but like he's just like a huge dude who's very protective of her, scares the shit out of the Latin tutor a few times, and just like has a cudgel, doesn't take any shit. I don't know. I love him. He's kind of a rock for her, and I like the way whenever them two are together, I thought they had a really nice, I don't know, chemistry almost. Or just the way those two characters play off of each other and the respect they have for each other.
Yeah, he's ready to at the drop of a hat, like do whatever needs to be done too. He's just like, he's a doer. He's not necessarily like a brilliant Shakespearean scholar.
No, I mean, he's like a farmer, right? Like he's very of the earth as well. But he's like, take care of her, man, or I'm going to fucking... harm is going to befall you if you don't take care of her. So when she goes off to the woods and disappears, he's like, I told you not to do this. Yeah. And it's like, he has to be reminded, like, we both want to find her, so let's go do that instead. Because for a moment there, he's about to beat some ass, it felt like.
And I love that Agnes gives birth on her own in the woods.
She goes out in the woods.
Natural birth kind of thing, like one with the earth.
It's very her too, though. She's like, and then she tries to do it again later, and they're like, no, they have to like capture her and bring her back. Yeah, that's very her though. She's like, I just want to go lay out in the woods and do it by myself. All right, so I'm gonna move along in the plot just to keep things moving. The novel's present-day timeline, if you want to call it that, centers on the summer of 1596, when a chain of seemingly unrelated events carry the bubonic plague to Stratford. Judith suddenly falls ill, and Hamnet searches desperately for help, thwarted by absent or indifferent adults. Agnes recognizes the symptoms and attempts to heal Judith with natural remedies, but the illness worsens. As the household gathers to nurse her, Hamnet refuses to leave his twin's side. In a final, selfless act, he crawls into bed with Judith, and when death comes, sacrifices himself in her place. By morning, Judith recovers as Hamnet succumbs to the plague, dying quietly and devastating his family. All right, so this is another big reveal, a big shift. We've set this up. Agnes finally has found out that her child has the plague. We hear about, and this is another thing I found really moving and interesting, the fear of the plague and what that must have been like. Because when you read about this period and the percentage of just the total population of people who died to the plague is insane. I think it's like a third of all people in Europe or something like died to the plague.
Yeah. And they didn't really understand and know how it was spreading and why it was spreading. And so it was just, they had to just basically isolate families and people who were exposed and just wait it out. And
they didn't know about germs. They don't know about any of that,
Yeah. And it's incredible too. There's that scene that I think you're going to get to here, which is where we take a step back and we follow this like cabin boy.
The flea. Which they do think it's the fleas, not the rats. The rats got a bad name for a long time, but it was actually the fleas that were on the rats that they think is what carried it.
Just like how descriptive and interesting the perspective of this was, because it was like talking about how like, this glass maker, he had like 3 fleas jumped off and 1 flea got onto the cabin boy or something, and like because they were rushing, and so there's all these like really interesting
monkey
coincidences.
Encounters.
That too.
That had the flea originally, I think. Yeah, and then it gets onto this ship, and then like a bunch of all the cats die in the ship, and then like.
And so I just assumed that this was going to lead to, this is how the plague spread, and this is an example of it. And then there's the holy shit moment at the very end of all this like journey, which is like, this package was then went to like clothing or some sort of like fabrics, and these fabrics were then like sent to a tailor or something in town, and the tailor got it, and Judith was there, and Judith was excited about it, and the tailor let Judith open it, and that's how the flea got on Judith, and that's how she got sick.
Crazy,
and I was like,
man.
what an incredible way to tell that like epic journey.
Yeah.
It's
one of those things too where I'm always like, whenever I hear about this kind of stuff, I'm like, how did everyone not die from the plague? Like, it's amazing that anybody survived it.
Yeah, totally.
It's crazy. And like sometimes people did recover, and she mentions that, and I think that's part of it too. But I think if you were young or old, especially, it was particularly fatal. I think it killed many people who were also not young or old, but it just killed everybody. Brutal plague, especially
with it being just like fleas, right? It's like fleas on cats, like animals. You just don't know like who's, somebody comes into your town.
Well, it's and like I think nowadays I think it's bacterial, so I believe it's something you can cure with antibiotics, but of course that didn't exist back then.
And just think about like, you're a small town in the mountains somewhere or something, and some traveler comes through, and of the plague, and you have to be so weary of every person who comes through. So
yeah, but you don't understand how it passes is the thing. Like, you don't know how it you know what I mean? Like, there's some ties to like, they isolate people. They tell them not to come out of their houses. The guy, I love the plague doctor showing up at the house, by the way. It's just a really cool moment with the beak and everything. And I was like, hell yeah, plague doctor. Because it's become such an iconic piece of like medieval attire, but it's interesting to see it in the way in which it was used, and also like the fear that would instill in like Hamnet, who sees it. It's like, it looks like a fucking demon is standing at my door. Like, what is going on?
Well, it would be terrifying, absolutely, and it's still, that's kind of has a connotation because of that now. Like, it's iconic, and it's like at least iconography like of the time, and it like evokes that. But also like I love that Agnes, after the doctor left, was like, this guy's a fool. He's a fool, and he doesn't know what he's talking about, because he gave like a frog.
He must give him like a desiccated frog, and she's like, we're not doing that.
Yeah. And eventually she's desperate enough to actually do that.
Well,
she tried everything.
It also just goes to show that like, it's not just herbal stuff that sometimes got into like mysticism and weird remedies and stuff. It's like everybody was doing it, the doctor's doing it, the priests are doing it, everybody's doing it, because everybody's just guessing, trying to find something that works. Maybe they see something that seems to have anecdotal evidence of working, and they're like, this is what works now. Sometimes there's something to it. Often there wasn't. But yeah, man, so this leads up to Hamnet's death. And this is, I think, it's a bait and switch, or that makes it sound negative. It's just a cool twist where, in the way that we've introduced the idea of there being some sort of magic, some sort of extra sensory reality, death is personified. And what happens is, you can read this as just like this is just like what Hamnet perceives or thinks is going on, and not what is actually happening. But like, there's a lot of evidence that it is what's happening. So at least within the realm of this book, it seems to be true.
Well, and then otherwise, it's just funny that all of the sort of supernatural elements are always painted in a way that it's like, could just be sort of coincidence or just like people perceiving things a certain way. But then you can also just take it, because it's supposed to be historical. It's supposed to be, historical fiction and being pretty accurate. But I love to take the step to this level, and because I think there is like, even to believe in Christianity at the time, like that is a level of mysticism, like for me looking at it right now. It's
absolutely.
A level
it's just more accepted. Yeah,
right. It's so that for this to be something that these characters were perceiving, and in his mind, Hamnet did make this sacrifice and did make this decision. That's powerful enough, whether it was real or not. Coincidentally, it worked.
Yeah. So within the fiction of this book, Hamnet crawls into the bed with his sister and has this sort of like negotiation with her. Some of it's just kind of in his own mind, some of it's with her. And he's thinking about this game they used to play, or they played a lot together. And it's where they would just take each other's place. They would fool each other or fool other people into thinking that they were each other.
Because they look very similar.
Because they look so similar. And he's always been the strong one. She's always been the sickly one, right? Like, she was the one who was born later, who almost died.
And because Judith was sickly, that's why Agnes stayed behind to kind of make sure that she was going to be okay before they were going to move to London. So that's all the progression of how this happens.
And then it leads up to his death, right? So he basically takes the arrow. He jumps in front of the bullet for her.
As an 11-year-old.
As an 11-year-old, and he's like, that's the thing I can do for you, that I will die and you get to live. And so in an already tragic moment of a child dying, we also see it as a heroic act, which is, it's powerful. And then we see the wake of this is what we're about to move into next. So part 2 of the novel follows the aftermath of Hamnet's death. Agnes prepares her son's body for burial and bonds with her mother-in-law Mary over shared loss. The father returns briefly from London, but soon leaves again, fearing the weight of his and Agnes's grief. Over time, he attempts to make amends by buying the family a grand new house in Stratford, where they slowly begin to rebuild their lives. Agnes remains consumed by sorrow until she learns that her husband has written a new play named Hamlet, after their dead son. Furious, and then compelled to understand, she travels to London with her brother Bartholomew and watches the performance. There, she recognizes her husband's tender transformation of their shared grief into art and realizes that through his memorial, she too can begin to transcend her loss. So that's an interpretation of the end that I do tend to agree with. But this is let's back up a little bit to the son dies, and this tears their family apart in some ways, and it creates a real rift because it feels like Shakespeare's absence. Maybe I should just refer to him as the tutor, since that we don't ever use that word. The tutor's absence in in his family life. It feels like this is a price that is paid in some ways. Like that if he was there, maybe this wouldn't have happened. So that is powerful. And then I think Agnes and him both sort of interpreted that way. She also wasn't there. She also was with the bees, kind of doing her own thing. So it's like her own independence maybe also played a role in this. And so there's guilt, and then there's just the grief of it, and the way that seeing a person can remind you of that grief, and seeing, and each of them have to deal with it in their own way. Agnes is changed. She it seems like the light is gone from her. She seems like a sort of shell of herself. And it's really tragic to see what it does to her as she has to deal with the aftermath of this alone because he leaves. But also I still feel bad for him because it's clear that he's distancing himself from it. Maybe you could say it's cowardly, but he, I think, can't bear it. And so it's clear that he has thrown himself into his work, thrown himself into writing. For a while, it says that he can only write comedies and histories because they don't touch on anything that's too close to home, too close to the heart. And it takes him a while, but eventually he's going to synthesize and express what happened through his art, through the writing of Hamlet. But I think it's open to interpretation and open to debate whether or not, whether or not it's worth it is maybe not even the right question, but what value there is. And then that there is always this dynamic, I think, in writing circles where people are writing about their own trauma, and especially if it involves other people, there's a little bit of an ethical line you have to walk of writing about it and using it to create art, but not wanting to cheapen it in order to turn it into a product, right? And so you're trying to find a way to memorialize it and immortalize it through the beauty of art, but also reality is you're selling books, you're selling tickets to your play, you're making a career out of this. So there's always also an inherent selling of grief, selling of pain, selling of something that shouldn't be sold. And that's it's that interesting line of commerce and art that we all have to walk, I think.
I think that's where Agnes, that's how she reacts.
Yeah.
Learning
at first she's how dare he do this?
Yeah. That's what she's reacting to when she hears that there's a play called Hamlet that he's written. And so she makes her way to London and of course that's it's the most tragic thing you can go through. And the immediate reaction is, why would you go there? Why would you try to make money or tell everyone this story that's so personal and so human and so what's the point of doing that? And then in eventually she sees the play and she sees the value in it.
Yeah,
I think
it seems that she understands.
At least for him, maybe it's not for her, but it is for him. And she understands what he has done in essence, killing off the father to keep the son, and
putting himself in the place of the ghost. She's like, he's taking his place metaphorically here.
He's chosen to sacrifice
He's
himself,
brought
like,
him back to
Hamnet.
life.
Like Hamnet sacrificed himself for Judith. I think that Shakespeare wishes that there was a way that he could and in that way, keeping the memory of his child alive and all that stuff. And I think that's what we can get into at the end. But this I think that so much of the power in the story comes from the universal feeling of grief, like losing someone, how it fundamentally changes in your perspective and your outlook, how this couple that we saw their romance blossom and how they're willing to make sacrifices for each other, but they just, like, by the end of the story, they don't know each other and almost seem like they don't want to, in a sense, be a part of each other's lives.
What an interesting sequence when he first comes back, right? The first time after the funeral. And she, because she's got her preternatural abilities, she can see women's like paw prints on him. I think that's how it's described, like palm prints or paw prints. And she can see their like claws in him. And she can feel hatred in the like bracelet he gives her. He's like, the person who this bracelet belonged to wish me pain or something. She gets the sense that he has been unfaithful. And I think he basically confirms it at one point. But other than that, like, we don't know for sure. And I kept wondering, like, is he actually being unfaithful? Or is it more that, like, there are a lot of women who want him and he's getting a lot of attention? But I don't know how much he's following through with it. But, like, I think the implication is that he is following through. And it's probably in a sense of, like, this is someone who's experiencing a lot of pain and grief. And he's probably just seeking out momentary distractions from it.
I mean, he was already trying to escape some of the trauma from his father, and then his son dies, and how he already wasn't around much. He was already finding the escape there, and then it seems that he may, this may have been the motivation for him to continue to just sort of run away and create the stories and be like, because he I think it's talked about in the novel too, where it's like he can be a different person. He can run away from the I don't know who he could have been in back in Stratford.
And then of course I feel so bad for Agnes because she's the only thing she hears about is like him having success. He's this hotshot playwright, and he's off in London living his exciting life with these other women, and he hardly ever comes home. And she doesn't even know the extent of it, and it's like it's crazy because then she's there left to deal with all of this, left to deal with all the family members, left to deal with the after effects of this.
And I think that's showing some of the imbalance too, like the social hierarchy of the time period
for
too,
sure.
Where it's like
gender
the
imbalance.
Women, the women were left
she has no
deal
choice.
with all this stuff, and they were at the whims of what their husbands were doing at the time.
You could argue that she enables him to go initially, but whether or not she understood the implications of that decision.
Yeah, well, eventually they were supposed to be there together, and that was always the plan. But I think that is showing what she's selfless. Like that's a selfless, sacrificial thing to do to show you care for somebody. I think in a sense, and then I don't know, it's kind of irredeemable in a sense, like that's like you can't.
Yeah. But like
look
people
at what
do
what
irredeemable
Agnes,
things when they are faced with an impossible situation, which this grief is. It's the tendency to self-destruct, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's like of course it's irredeemable, and I think he knows that. But like there's something about that, like just needing something, and like you hurt so bad already that like the idea of doing something, it just like maybe it'll give you something else to feel bad about for a minute. Like it's just like there's things that can creep in, and I think I don't necessarily think she forgives him for it, but she's able to see what could have led him there, because she has this thought where she's like, I could never imagine doing this. How could he do this? But I think seeing him, like connecting with him over his grief, I don't know. I think it at least gives her a little bit of insight into what he's done. I don't know that she forgives him for it, but maybe she will come to one day or come to understand it, or because.
Well, regardless, like we as the audience can see how unfair that is too, right? Like how Agnes is like suffering through it as much, if not more, than he is, and dealing with it more on a day-to-day basis with little to no escape from it. And
she
like,
faces it every day, and he knows that too. And you could say like that's evidenced by what he does, and that he buys her a new house away from his father away from the baggage of that. She gets this giant house in the town, and this is a real thing that he did. From what I was reading, he did send a ton of money back to his family, even though they're barely talked about at all in the histories of talking about him. It was known that he had a family back there and that he would send them tons of money. He bought a lot of properties in that town, and they, like, his family, like, managed them. So, like, that, all that stuff that starts happening, like, at the very end of the book, that's all real.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Yeah, that's. Yeah. I got to go read more about some of that.
And I was going to say, like, one thing I did read too is that when he retired, which was he was at age 49 or something, and it's because I think he got a little bit ill, a little bit unclear, like something was going bad with his health. He goes back home at that point, and he spends the last three years of his life with his wife, before passing away in their home that he had bought. So that's his only time where he, like, truly comes back, is right at the end of his life. But
was it also true that he, like, how infrequently he was there? Like,
I think so.
Almost always in London,
I think the implication, and a lot of people said that, like, in fact, it's likely that he went back more than is known, but, like, people seem to imply that he never went back.
Yeah.
But that does not seem to be true. Like, he probably did at several times and at different points, but yeah, I think the implication is he didn't come back much. And it's interesting because, like, just traveling's different, you know, it's harder, but, like, it's also not that far from London. So it's like, it's interesting that he just didn't go back more. Also, I loved her detail. I can't remember if this was at the end or I saw it elsewhere, but she was talking about how it is not said that Hamnet died from the plague, but also the plague, the bubonic plague, which was a huge presence in the life of these people, a huge threat. It is never mentioned in any of his works. Now, I didn't independently confirm this, but she said that it doesn't come up in any of his works. Maybe she was talking specifically the bubonic plague or something. I don't know. And I think she interpreted that absence as telling, because maybe it was too painful to write about.
Yeah. Or either for himself or general audiences, because it was it's just a topic that they couldn't.
Who knows? Who knows? But I love the idea that maybe that was because it was the thing that killed his son. It could have been.
But I do think it's interesting that idea that, like, if he was avoiding the topic, then that could be sort of inferred as evidence to maybe he.
It's like the omission tells you something.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. All right, man. So I think there's more to get into with this story. I think it's a very rich one. I'm really excited that we're gonna get to tackle this movie next. I think it's gonna be a really fascinating one. This is getting a lot of awards buzz. You were telling me that it's getting Oscars buzz.
Big time, yeah. I think it won the Golden Globe for like best dramatic picture. Yeah.
Yeah. Who are the leads again? It's
Jessie Buckley.
Yeah.
And she was fantastic. I love her. And then
I was gonna say she's someone we like on this podcast, right? Was she in I'm thinking of Ending Things?
Yep.
Yeah, and she's so good in that.
Great. And then Paul Mescal, I think.
Paul Mescal, yeah. And he also looks really good. What a role to have to embody, Mescal, you know. Yeah. But everything I've seen, I sent you this trailer a long time ago and said, man, this is one we should do. It looks interesting. And I remember hearing that Maggie O'Farrell, who wrote the book, co-writes the screenplay with Chloé Zhao, who is the director of the film.
Who's a filmmaker I have a lot of respect for. She's incredible. Very, like, her films are, like, human is like is a word that I would use to describe everything I've seen her make. So she has a very strong, I think, mastery and control over that style of filmmaking, like creating something that feels genuine, true, and, like, is, like, organic to the human experience is, like, like, especially, like, Nomadland was a film that like, when I saw that, I was like, no one's making stories like this, and it feels so powerful and so close and so real. That's so awesome. I can see a filmmaker like that picking up a story like this and the book, and just thinking about how she could have a take on it. So that's really cool.
Let's at the end, very end of the episode, we'll maybe lay out a couple, like, wish list items, and you can think about that a little bit for, like, things that maybe you're hoping to see in the adaptation. If you enjoyed our coverage of the book, Hamnet, please let us know in the form of a rating and review on whatever app you chose to listen on. If you're on YouTube, make sure to leave a comment, make sure to like the video and subscribe to our channel, and make sure to join our Discord. I'll make sure to share links everywhere. We'd love to have you on there, and that's how you're going to be able to suggest projects to us.
We're also on different social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, all of those at Ink to Film. And really, we're on pretty much every social media platform, so look for us out there.
And if you would like to pick up any of these books, whether it's Hamnet or Project Hail Mary or Night of the Seven Kingdoms, these books that are coming up, Frankenstein, we have a bookshop. I'll have the link in the show notes. Click on that, and you can buy the book through there, and we get like a little kickback from Bookshop, even though it doesn't cost anything extra to you. So it's a way to help the show out and get yourself some physical books.
Yeah, do it. And we also have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/Ink to Film. And on there, if you'd like to support us, you can do it for as little as $2 a month. And that gives you access to our bonus episodes, which we do monthly, and we do sort of adaptation adjacent things and all kinds of different projects. So if you want access to that, it's just $2 a month.
And we'd like to thank Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music. All right, man. So here at the end, I just thought it would be fun for a moment. I can share mine too if you want. But any wish list items, any things you're hoping to see? I guess I've already kind of tipped my hand a little bit. I want to see John get a comeuppance. I want to see something happen to John. At least get I don't know if he's gonna get his ass beat or anything, although I wouldn't say no to that. But it needs to come out what he did.
Yeah.
And I hope we get that scene. Maybe we won't, but I hope to see that. I would say the other main thing is, I think the stage and the beauty and power of the performances of these plays and the way that you could use that to highlight certain moments in this narrative is something that I think you could totally develop. You could show lines, you could show moments that he's creating, and then you could have that seem to be commentary or tie back to what else we're seeing. Yeah. So I suspect we might get some of that.
I think you're right on that. I think that's a great point, because I want to see the ways that the actual moment-to-moment performance being juxtaposed with some of the traumatic things that are coming that build up for this family, and the way that they kind of mirror, as we said, Romeo and Juliet. There's all these different things that they could use as framing devices to connect all the way through some of Shakespeare's work, and then also what this story is setting up. And then a big wish list thing for me is just I was really struck by, and we both talked about this, the prose in this story and how grounded and tactile it felt. Mm-hmm. And I hope that there's some contemplative filmmaking, which I'm sure there will be with Chloé Zhao at the helm, of just really letting us live and see and feel that spirituality of whatever this if there are even powers in this version of it, or in this version of the story.
I think I don't know. I suspect we're going to get some implication of there being something either supernatural going on, or there's a force at play. And I hope that stays, because I think that's sort of essential to what this book is. And
I'm hearing nothing but good things. I've heard that the film is incredible. I heard the performances are amazing. So I think those are things I'm expecting going in. So I want to have low expectations and just be I love to be happily surprised. I'm sure it's going to be a great film. But wish list wise, I just I want to be taken on a journey like this story did for me.
Yeah. I hope the cinematography lives up to the prose.
Yeah, totally.
All right, man. That's going to be it for our season 10 premiere and for our Hamnet book episode. We will be back next week for the film. But until next time,
keep adapting.